Hitting bricks with balls has been a part of gaming from the early days, and ever since Arkanoid changed up the gameplay, it has remained a staple of gaming ever since. And while the Amiga port of that game was great, I'm interested in seeing what the Amiga devs could do with the genre. So let's see what Amiga first or only games those developers created as an answer to Arkanoid. And welcome to Goldfish on Games. And the first brick we're going to hit today is Amegas. Being one of the earlier games, it came out in 1987, and it was developed by Reline, who would go on to make a number of games that, well, we probably won't show on the channel. And for an early Amiga game, this is showing a lot of colour with some detailed graphics, and there's even some shadows going on. Not that you can really make it out on that very busy background. Now you might be wondering what separates Arkanoid from Breakout. Both have you using a bat to bounce a ball around a screen to break some bricks. Well, you can think of Arkanoid as being a far more complex game. There are power-ups, there's baddies, and there's a number of brick types for you to deal with. Oh, and that it came out almost 10 years after the original Breakout. Which would explain why, in a span of just a few years, we got a number of variations on that game. And this one, well, it's a relatively competent take on the game. You move the bat around with the mouse, the ball bounces around mostly okay, although it can get a bit fast, and sometimes the collision detection, well, it doesn't. There are power-ups, which are the spinning coloured things that fall from some of the bricks, and you'll have to collect them with the bat. But they aren't triggered right away, instead you have to activate them with the right mouse button. Now so far I've seen ones that made the bat bigger, make it sticky, or turn it into a ship that can shoot the bricks. There's also a multi-ball, but trying to just deal with one ball at a time can be difficult with how it controls. And the other obvious big problem is the overly detailed backgrounds. They can make tracking the ball and the floating baddies a bit difficult. I mean, just try reading the high score table. And if you can barely read that, then what chances do you have when the ball is moving at high speeds? But I will give it one thing, it has a lot of interesting ideas. As once I managed to move on through a few levels, you notice there are quite a few different brick types. You got ones that when they get hit they'll spawn more, which is really cool. It's just a shame it gets let down by some really fiddly controls, and the fact that the ball doesn't always go where you expect it to. So let's see if the next game is any better, as we check out Crystal Hammer, which just so happened to be by the exact same developer, Reline, and this came out a year after Amegas. And it's clear that this was built on the same systems that they had made for the previous game. But in that time, they must have listened to the reviews and the players and toned everything down, as it's now possible to read the high score table. And in game it does feel like a much improved title. Again, the backgrounds are a little messy, but it's not as bad as it was before, and the shadows show up much clearer. And the collision detection actually feels much better as well. It's still fast and active, but weirdly, of all the things that they slow down, it was the power-up drops. They now stick around for a few seconds before making their descent. Slowly. So very, very slowly. While making a very annoying sound. But now they do activate as soon as you touch them. But that also highlights one of the flaws in this game and the previous one. The power-ups don't stack. So you might have a wide bat and then collect the multi-ball. Well, if you do that, then the bat will reduce back down in size. Or you might have the wide bat and collect a second one. Well, you'll get the animation of it reducing down and then going back up again. They also removed the little hints of which bricks would actually drop a power-up. But I think overall, the new style is a lot better. But I did find it funny that they thought people were fed up with this style of game in 1988, as the game box reads, "Oh Christ, not another one of these games." Yes indeed, but Crystal Hammer is specifically designed for your Amiga, and makes full use of the complete capacity of this excellent computer. And Reline must have really liked this game enough, as in 1993 they released Crystal Hammer 93, or V2 depending on where you look. Now this seems to be pretty much the same game, with an extra 20 levels added on top of it, giving you 50 in total. So if you really love the game, then you're going to love 20 more levels. But it seems they didn't take that time to write any new music, or even add more sound effects. And I've not found any other improvements to this version, so it's a bit weird that they waited 5 years to release this update. Bouncing in next is Ball Raider. And when you name your game that, you're just going to have to lean into it. This was also released in 1988, which seemed to be the year of the Arkanoid clones, and this was made by Golden Gate Crew. And the first thing that hit me when I was playing was how basic that bat looked. I thought I had a corrupted version of the game, but when I looked at some reviews and their screenshots, it looked the same. Actually, tell a lie, the first thing that hit me was the controls. As imagine making a game for the Amiga, a computer that came bundled with a mouse, and then deciding that you would make it joystick only. It doesn't even feature any way of speeding the bat up, unlike many other Arkanoid games that were limited to controllers on the consoles. This is also the first game that we've seen where they implemented alternative launches, as the ball will launch to the left, and then the next time it'll go to the right, and then it'll flip back again. So you have to remember the direction it went last time for when you launch it this time. Or you might just bounce off a wall or go in the wrong direction. There are also power-ups, but these will be gotten as soon as the ball breaks a brick, and it will just tell you at the bottom of the screen what you have. And it's quite limited. You might have fast ball, slow ball, or stop, which means it will stick to the paddle. Amazingly, for such an early title, they managed to have music and sound effects at the same time, although that tiny looping bit of music will grate after a while. But the place where most of the effort has been put into has to be the backgrounds, as these feel like they should have come out of the demo scene, rather than this game, as they do look really good. Just a shame it makes it so much harder to see what's going on with the playfield. Now what makes this really weird is in the same year they released Ball Raider 2, and you can tell it's a sequel by the tiny II they added to the title screen, as well as the new music. Although this one seems to have been made by the Incredible Trio. I'm not too sure what happened in the background with all of this, but this one actually feels like everything that first game was not. We have mouse controls, the backgrounds look more simple but in keeping with the levels, and there's animated touches on the bricks. And the bat, well, it looks like a bone, but it has been well drawn. The power-ups are now dropped from the breaking bricks, and there are baddies that will enter from the top of the well. It also has a brick type that we've not seen before, as there are these ones that will move when hit, and they'll only vanish when they get hit into another brick or into a wall, which makes it really difficult, if interesting, to take them out. But it gets far more interesting the further we go into it, as there's bricks that will explode and take out the solid ones nearby that will open up new areas for the ball to go into. But the best bit, at least for me, is that there's an editor. And I do love me a good level editor. It's just baffling that this was sold as a sequel. It should have had its own name and it could have stood up on its own. Next up is Giganoid. A Swiss computer arts production that came out in, yes, 1988. This is the only game that I've played so far that auto-fires the ball after a few seconds. It's a little annoying, but you do quickly adapt and try to get yourself into position. But in saying that, the movement of the ball and how it reacts feels the best of what I've played so far. It bounces off the bricks and the bat just right, with it more or less going where I expect. It's one of those things that tends to get overlooked, or they don't get it just right, but here I think they've done a good job. And it's a similar story with the graphics, as they're basic but they're well drawn and work with the rest of the game. So the backgrounds, they don't get in the way, and you can easily tell what is a brick and what is a wall. Which again, should be considered the basics, but as we've seen, there are some messy looking games. But the audio is the one place they really did go for it. As while we don't have a lot of music, there are quite a few sound effects when things happen. And of course we had to have some speech when you start.
Everyone out there ready?
And I think it's safe to say I hear that little bit of audio a lot when I was playing this one. My skills at these type of games, they aren't the best. But what is missing are the monsters, as there's nothing floating around for you to hit your ball against. Now, some of the reviewers class this as a good thing, but I do find that they can help, as there are times where there's a brick where you just can't seem to hit it as it's in a really awkward place. But you get lucky as it bounces off one of those floating things and sends it in the right direction. Or it gets stuck in a loop. That's another great place where those floating aliens can be handy. The power-ups are similar to what we've seen so far. And it also has the same problems that they don't stack. But this title also got a bit of a random update in 1990, called Meganoid: The Screen Construction Set. I'm not sure why they renamed it, as far as I can tell it was known as Giganoid everywhere in the world. But we'll just go with whatever they want. And cool enough is that there is a prize for the best screen if you entered it. I wonder if that PO box is still valid and if anyone did actually send some of their screens over to them. And what that prize might have been. But I think we can tell this is the same game. And if you don't believe me,
Everyone out there ready?
I think they've done a really good job with the UI for building these screens, as it's much easier than the last one. But at the same time, it does show that this is far more limited in what brick types that it has. It's just some basic colours, and then some bricks that can take multiple hits to break. And you also have to place the power-ups. But it is very easy to use, and you can quickly make up some very interesting levels with it.
Everyone out there ready?
Sticking to the paddle next is Breakout Revolution. And believe it or not, this was released in 1996. and is actually a PD game by Oliver Michael. Now normally I would just show a single PD game or something different as an extra at the end of the video, but in this one there are a few that I wanted to talk about as they are really interesting. Because as we can see with this one, it's an AGA game where they used pre-rendered 3D graphics. It even required the game to be installed to a hard drive. Now I think this might be due to there being two modes, and the first one is Classic, and that's what we've been seeing so far. And this is very much your typical Arkanoid style game. Well, it's missing the monsters, but apart from that, we have the power-ups, we have a number of interesting brick types, as you'll get some that will explode with a single hit. But through all that, you might have also noticed something else falling as well. Coins. And this is actually an important part of the game, as you can collect money, and then at any time you can pause the game and bring up the shop. Now for me, possibly the most important item is more ships, as I'm still not any better at playing these games, but for everyone else, those extra various power-ups might be the key to winning a round. And for a first time in this video, we actually have a game which allows you to combine various power-ups. All it took was the power of the A1200, but we have it. And what it also gave us were these funny screens that insults you when all your lives are gone. But what about that second mode, Space and Tech? Well, this is quite the variation on the gameplay, as you can now move the craft vertically as well as horizontally, although you are limited to the lower quarter of the screen. But this makes quite the difference to the gameplay, as you might expect. This one also mixes a lot of stuff up, as we get different sizes and shapes of the bricks, as we have lots of these half-style ones, but also the moons and planets are actually bricks. They're not backgrounds, so they are something you'll have to deal with. There are still no floating aliens or monsters, which you might have expected from the space theme, but it does have everything else, including some slowdown that you'll get even with an upgraded Amiga. The game does like to throw items at you, and when there's a lot of stuff going on, that's where you'll see all that slowdown. It's also when you might find it difficult to keep track of where the ball is, as it'll just get lost in all of that stuff falling down. I think the modes are quite interesting, and if this released a few years earlier, this could have been a commercial title. If they had sorted out some of the issues like the movement lag, or the ball getting stuck in some of those curved corners. But even without that, this could have been seen as a decent step up. Collecting all the pickups is Megaball. This isn't just a game, but a whole series that was released over the years, starting in early 1992. This might be the biggest and most well-known PD version of Arkanoid on the Amiga, as some of the versions were put on cover discs, and according to the Hall of Light, one version even got a commercial release. This, I think, is the final version of the game, and it does feel very refined, even if it does have a good PD feeling to it. And they really do like to have a very flashy first level, that shows off a number of the features that you'll be seeing as you progress further into the game. As we have bricks that will explode, clearing whole areas, or ones that will create more bricks. And of course there has to be a good range of items falling down for you to collect as well. But like a few of the other games that we've seen, they decided to skip the aliens, so it's just you versus the board. One thing I did notice while I was playing is I think that they borrowed a few sound effects from other classic Arkanoid games, like Crypt and Egg, a game that I would have loved to have included in this, but it was Atari first, down to the fact the bat had an Atari logo on it. So we'll just have to see this game instead. But you'll have to be very careful, as like many of the other games as well, there are negative pickups that will fall. There's the typical ones that will reduce the size of your bat, but there are more evil ones that might pull the whole screen down every time it hits it, or might just outright kill you. Those ones are really annoying, but thankfully you can tell the negative ones apart from the good ones, as they are orange. The types of bricks is really what makes this series, as we have the basics that we've seen before, but you'll get really cool ones that might grow over time and slowly expand, so you'll have to try and hit those quickly. And there's some that actually act as switches and will turn other bricks off. I guess after you've done at least 4 versions of the same game, you have to be creative to keep it coming. And they do enjoy making levels that are a bit of a spectacle, as you might hit a brick and then have a whole bunch of things happen. It makes each level interesting and unique. And what is also becoming a bit of a trend with these games, we have a level editor. That is nicely done, with a bunch of useful features like moving the whole screen around. And when you add in that there's music and sound effects that play at the same time, and there's also a bunch of music tracks, so you don't have to hear the same looping bit of music constantly, it turns out it makes for a great game. Even if they didn't decide to include any backgrounds, I think that might have been for the best, because as we've seen, they can get a little bit confusing when you already have a lot going on. So this is easily one of the best that we've seen today, and is definitely the one that you should go check out. But rounding it all out, we have Amiganoid. This isn't PD or shareware, this is DIware, as this was made by Digital Illusions. And they say that if you want to play this, then all you need to have done is bought one of their new games that they're releasing, like the Pinball series, or one of the fancy new titles like Benefactor, or Hardcore? I think that one might have gone missing. The big change here is the fact that you have 2 bats, which means you now have 2 places where you can lose the ball. This obviously ups the stakes, but I think it's done well enough that it's not too complex, it just sort of works. But overall, this one is more like Breakout than Arkanoid, as there aren't any power-ups or monsters. It's just you versus an increasingly interesting set of challenges. But for a free title, this is really nicely done. And there we have it. What do you think of my picks? I had a real hard time trying to cut this down to the games that we've seen today, because as a genre, it did really well on the Amiga, particularly in 1988 and then again in 1992. So let me know what your favourites are, or if there's any that I should include in a follow-up to this video. You can tell me in the comments. And until next time, I was the Goldfish, that was a lot of balls, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thanks for watching. This was a fun video to make. And if you like what you see and you want to check out more, then I did a whole video on Crypt and Egg. Or you might want to watch some of my other Amiga Answer To videos. Or you might even consider subscribing, as it would let you know when I release new videos.